We got to talk about it. We got to talk about the Billy Edwards Jr. injury update. It is not as bad as I think many thought at first glance. As the night progressed, it seemed pretty clear that it was not going to be as bad as initially anticipated or just otherwise feared by maybe a scarred Wisconsin Badgers fan base. But I do kind of want to be the bearer of bad news that I'm not totally sold yet on what happens for a quote week to week Billy Edwards Jr. Yes, it is Talking Badgers, powered by BadgerNotes.com. I am your host, Kedrick Stumbris. You can find me on all the various social medias, like the website formerly known as Twitter and Blue Sky, at Kedrick Stumbris. You can find the podcast at Talking Badgers. Also, watch us on YouTube.com/at Talking Badgers. If you are in the chat right now, we are live. It is a Friday night, Labor Day weekend, Friday night, the weekend for college football in America. If you are in the chat right now, shouts to you. Really appreciate you. Hope you are having an excellent start to your long holiday weekend. Let me know what you think about the injury update to Billy Edwards Jr. because per Pete Thamel, Billy Edwards Jr. avoided the worst when you see a non-contact injury to a leg that the quarterback had already dinged up, knocking knees in camp, bruising a knee. Pete Thamel, ESPN college football reporter, says Wisconsin quarterback Billy Edwards had a clean MRI today, and his status is week to week, which eliminated the worst fears after leaving the opener with a non-contact injury. He sprained his knee against Miami. And the kicker, a precise timetable for return isn't known. So both week to week and a timetable to return is not known, which makes it seem pretty clear to me that if Billy Edwards Jr. had to suit up today to play football, he could not. He would not. If there is a need for a timetable to return, it means he is not currently available. So week to week, maybe a small misnomer, but I think ultimately the expectation of he would at minimum miss week 2 against the Middle Tennessee State Blue Raiders. Am I right? Are they the Blue Raiders? Somebody in the chat correct me if I'm wrong. Is pretty clear. What that means for the weeks ahead in a monumentous matchup in Tuscaloosa inside Bryant-Denny Stadium as the Wisconsin Badgers visit the Alabama Crimson Tide in just 2 weeks' time. I don't know. I don't know that the staff looks at that game, and certainly these are competitors. These are elite competitors. They want to win every game. I don't know that the staff necessarily looks at that game and says, our goal is to get bowl eligible this year. Do we rush Billy Edwards Jr. back for the Alabama game? I don't know. He is not who I'm necessarily most concerned about in all of this. I still think it is the offensive line. But regardless, Danny O'Neal is going to need to step up for at least one game. For at least one game against, yes, a lesser opponent. If it includes needing Danny O'Neal to step up for a greater opponent, look, head coach Luke Fickell does not have the greatest track record in those games with his non-preferred starting quarterback. He doesn't have the greatest track record in those games with his preferred starting quarterback anyway. But I do think those specifics are worth digging into a little bit here. Because if the status really is week to week, there is something of a staggered stop and start experience that Wisconsin has in its backup quarterback, starting quarterback situation in the Luke Fickell era, and that's the 2023 season. Yes, when Tanner Mordecai returned, he was back, but they seemingly forced him back. I am far, far, far from convinced that Tanner Mordecai was fully healthy after breaking a bone in his hand against Iowa when Tanner Mordecai comes back in a disastrous game. Disastrous performance for the offense in particular in that game against the Northwestern Wildcats. Just horrifically, terribly ugly. But when Wisconsin loses a football game to the Indiana Hoosiers, yeah, I understand the want to force your starting quarterback back onto the field. And that's ultimately, I have no confirmations. No, I'm not trying to dig into anybody's psyche, but that's the sequencing of events that happened in 2023. Tanner Mordecai exits the game against the Iowa Hawkeyes. Ultimately, we learned that he has broken a bone in his hand. Braden Locke enters that game in relief and then ends up offering up a start against Ohio State and a start against Indiana. Both losses with a win against Illinois thrown before those two losses. But ultimately, the loss to Indiana is what crushes you. That's not spectacular. But that ultimately was Luke Fickell's last loss of the season in 2023 with his preferred starter, throwing in Northwestern into the mix. Now, that included the need for overtime against a not great Nebraska team. That included a pretty tremendous job on the ground by Braylon Allen inside Huntington Bank Stadium to defeat the Minnesota Gophers. This is ultimately, and the question hanging over all of this is, or the important point hanging over all of this is that this is a new offensive system, and how much does that somewhat quarterback-proof the system? It remains to be seen, I suppose, but nothing we've seen so far indicates that this is a complete disaster waiting to happen in the wings. I want to get to some of the comments for the people who are enjoying their Friday night with us real quick. Herb Herman says, if Billy Edwards Jr. dinged up his knee the same way in fall camp, then this will happen again later in the season. We'll be walking on eggshells from here on out. I don't totally disagree with this sentiment, but the difference here is in camp, that was a contact injury where he knocked knees with a guy. The replay of the injury is that this was, he just falls. Like, he just starts stumbling and falls to the ground. So I don't think they weren't injuries suffered in the same manner. And when looking back at the replay, I don't think it's entirely clear that it's the same leg, frankly. My initial reaction was, yes, it was the knee that he knocked in camp. But when I looked back, I couldn't totally tell for sure that the leg he came up a little bit lame on was, in fact, that same leg. And it's obvious which one it is, even if you didn't know, even if you weren't there during spring ball. He's wearing a preventative brace on the knee that he knocked. And I don't know. I think it's probably a little bit open to interpretation which leg he came up a little bit lame on. I really do think so. So I don't know which leg in particular it is. I don't want to make assumptions that we don't necessarily know. When we talk to Luke Fickell on Tuesday morning, I mean, I plan to ask if nobody else is going to ask. I want to know. But regardless, yeah, walk on eggshells for a quarterback behind an offensive line that I don't think covered itself in glory on Thursday evening. The next comment from Brian Shetty. If you have any other thoughts from the game on Thursday, quarterback or non-quarterback involved, throw them in the comments. We're going to get to them on this show tonight. Brian Shetty says either way, we need the offensive line to step up going forward, regardless of who is the quarterback. Yeah, absolutely. And like, I don't even think it is a fact that you need the offensive line to step up even more in the scenario in which it is a Billy Edwards back there because he's already dinged up. Based on how long we saw Danny O'Neil hang on to the ball, way too gosh darn long, by the way, throughout the evening on Thursday night, you need an offensive line that is ready to step up for either of the quarterbacks back there. Because as Dylan Graff has said on this show before, I know that they want to run the ball. That is their mantra. But I think they're going to have plenty of opportunities to come from behind this season, which is going to involve a need to throw the ball. That's spooky. That is spooky indeed. On the whole, and again, this is different systems, a whole ton of caveats. Luke Fickell, as the head coach of the Wisconsin Badgers football program, is 8-2. 8 wins, 2 losses with his preferred starting quarterback who starts and finishes the football game. In games where Luke Fickell's preferred starting quarterback does not finish the game, he is 5-10. Was 4-10 coming into Thursday evening and was 0-2 coming into Thursday evening in games where he had another quarterback have to step in 2 games in relief. Of course, Wisconsin losing that 2023 matchup with Iowa as Tanner Mordecai exits, and Wisconsin losing that 2024 matchup against the Alabama Crimson Tide as Tyler Van Dyke exits. This Thursday was the first time in the Luke Fickell era that Wisconsin has won a football game in which a backup quarterback enters the game in relief of an injured starter. Different circumstances, to be sure. A lesser opponent, to be sure, than either Iowa or the Alabama Crimson Tide. I don't think anybody is disputing that fact. But Danny O'Neil had to go out and put his mark on that game. And he most certainly did put his mark on it. When Danny O'Neil entered that game, it was still 3-0 with 9:45 remaining in the second quarter. There was a lot of game to play. He led the offense down the field a few times. One of them, of course, a pick. One of them, of course, punting on the Miami 37. One of them a touchdown. And then there was the 17-0 touchdown on a 2-yard drive. I do think what we saw from Danny O'Neil inspired more confidence than what we have seen in the past 2 seasons from Braden Locke. Whether or not that remains to be seen in Big Ten play is ultimately the question. I am not sure. And there will be an opportunity to see Danny O'Neil in this offense playing extended snaps this Saturday. I presume. I guess not this Saturday. It's still Friday. Next Saturday, I presume we will see Danny O'Neil playing extended snaps with the first team offense. I presume so. And if he is going to inspire a high level of confidence with Wisconsin Badgers fans that he can go out and win a Big Ten game, and not to say that he does not have starting quarterback experience. Of course he does. He started 11 games at San Diego State last season and was fairly successful in that role. It was not a banner raising year for San Diego State by any means, but look, it was a 3-8 season. It wasn't spectacular. One of your wins was over an FCS opponent. Quarterback wins aren't a stat. Pretty high completion percentage at 63. 12 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. That's not a San Diego State offense in which Danny O'Neil was asked to do a ton. I think he's going to be asked to do a little bit more with his legs in this version of the Wisconsin Badgers offense, I think. But I am not totally sure. The expectation, if you are a believer in Wisconsin to get to a bowl game this season, the expectation next Saturday should be that they come in and beat the brakes off of Middle Tennessee State. Now that I'm thinking about it, I want to find out what the SP Plus projection for that kind of matchup might be, and we're going to do it live in real time here. Middle is, and it's a bigger spread than most certainly what the spread of 17.5 was against Miami, Ohio. And looking right now, Middle Tennessee is the 11th worst team in the FBS by Bill Connolly of ESPN's SP Plus Power Rankings. That is profoundly abysmal. And I am struggling to find here's the number. Oh my gosh, it really is. So I was thinking I was looking at the wrong number, which was why I could not pull it up very immediately. Negative 17.7. And then we're going to pull the difference between that and a Wisconsin power ranking. That is 8.9. So SP Plus rates this as a 2.5 home 30-point victory, nearly a 29.1 point spread. Okay. Man, I don't know. I don't know. I don't really know how to react to that in real time. If any of you in the chat want to let me know, do you think Wisconsin can beat Middle Tennessee by 4 touchdowns? Let me know. I will have more opinions on that tomorrow after they play. I think they play a 6 p.m. game against Austin P tomorrow. I got it on the calendar. It's what I can tell you. I got that on the calendar. I got a 2:30 matchup between the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Florida State Seminoles on the calendar. And I'll have more opinions on what's going to happen next week after that. Regardless, I do think that a week-to-week projection for Billy Edwards is still a downside for this team that needs all the reps that it can get with its starting quarterback. And Luke Fickell last night at the postgame presser basically alluded to something like that, which was saying, look, Billy took the lion's share, by far the most significant number of the starting quarterback snaps in practice. And he even said, look, that might surprise you, just the percentage of the starting quarterback snaps that he took, but we have to install the system. He's new here. We're trying to get everybody familiar with each other. And if he's not going to have an opportunity to do that before Big Ten play, that's rough. Because, again, this schedule does not give you time to figure your shiz out. It doesn't. Miami and Middle Tennessee are the only times you have to figure it out. It's the only times. And that time has been stripped away from Billy Edwards. It's gone. Because those should be wins almost regardless of who's quarterbacking the team. Alabama most likely a loss, regardless of who's quarterbacking the team, maybe Sans prime Cam Newton. I'm just being inflammatory with that statement. But then it's Big Ten play. And if the goal is to get to bowl eligibility, once you get to Big Ten play, you cannot afford any significant disruptions in these games that you should win. Yes, this team should beat Maryland, should comfortably beat Maryland. I think it is probably the case that this team should somewhat comfortably beat Maryland, regardless of whether it is Danny O'Neill or Billy Edwards Jr. at quarterback. I do believe that. But then what? You bring Billy Edwards Jr. back for a maybe winnable matchup with Michigan, in which I imagine that is going to be the closest. Yeah, that would be the closest game by point spread that Wisconsin will have played at that point in time. No, Maryland will be that. But the Michigan, Iowa, and if he's weak, if he truly is week to week, you just don't know. You don't know how to project it out. No expected timetable. Yes, the worst has been avoided, but I do think things are not rosy. And I can be convinced that Danny O'Neill can steal a game against Iowa. I can be convinced. If you think otherwise, hit the chat right now. Do you think Danny O'Neill can steal a win against Iowa? I can be convinced of that. Can I be convinced that he can steal a win against Michigan? Probably not. Do I think that I can be convinced that he can steal a win against Illinois? I don't know. I think Illinois is doing a really good job tonight of bashing the brains in of a lesser opponent against Western Illinois. Last I saw, Illinois was up 38-0 midway through the third quarter. That's not something Wisconsin has done to anybody in a while. That includes an FCS opponent in South Dakota, much like Illinois is playing tonight in Western Illinois. That's a long time from now. Presumably, if Billy Edwards' injury is not season-ending, as we have thus far been told it is by reports, I think that's probably a moot question. But if it is a week-to-week thing, it's going to be a question every week until we are told it is not a question. And that's why I think it's worth saying do you think Danny O'Neill could win this game? Do you think Danny O'Neill could win this game? I know that's not what anybody wants to hear. I know I am not being like the rosy, happy voice of, wow, the Wisconsin Badgers just won a football game. But the idea that the starting quarterback of this football team is week to week, I think inherently leaves more questions than it creates answers. Because if he were out. And I'm not saying this is a better situation for Wisconsin, right? I'm saying it's a better situation for us being able to create discourse. We can more confidently say, all right, let's take a big look at Danny O'Neil and see what's going to happen. But instead, we have to sit here and ask, should we take a big look at Danny O'Neil? What do the snaps become in practice every week? As we mentioned earlier in the show, thus far, Luke Fickell has been giving, understandably so, maybe a disproportionate number of QB1 reps to Billy Edwards Jr. in practice in game week. Understandably so. What does that split become if the quarterback is truly week to week? That's a really hard decision, and I'm glad I don't have to make it. Ultimately, I am looking forward to learning more about what this team looks like with a quarterback in Danny O'Neil against Middle Tennessee. And I'll have more thoughts from there. I'll have more thoughts after rewatching the game this weekend. There's so much college football on, and I'm going to watch a game that already happened. So that's my plan. That's probably my plan for this electric Friday evening. I'm doing while I'm live on YouTube at 9:28 p.m. Phenomenal. For all of you who decided to come on and listen to me babble more or less about the Billy Edwards Jr. injury update, I appreciate you. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been Talking Badgers. I've been your host, Kedrick Stumbris. For the week moving forward, like I mentioned, Luke Fickell is going to address the media, as well as player representatives will address the media on Tuesday. We'll try to get an After Dark episode in your feed. After that, as well as some Seamus Says later in the week as we preview the matchup with the Wisconsin Badgers and Middle Tennessee. Before any of that, we should have another episode in your feed talking about what I saw upon rewatching the Wisconsin Badgers victory over the Miami, Ohio Redhawks. But until we put that in your feed, go enjoy your Labor Day weekend. Drink some brews, eat some brats, watch some college football. If you're a Packers fan, maybe watch some Micah Parsons highlights. Until we talk to you all again, then on Wisconsin.